So after last year was such a stacked year for the horror genre, we're gonna start 2025 off with a few more horror movies. Which, if you're familiar with the channel, I'm not complaining. So, and we'll get to all the other stuff that's come out as well. And I figured it felt right to just kind of pair these together, even though they are sort of all different kinds of horror. One's kind of even arguable if it even is horror, but that might also be kind of an asset for it also, but we'll talk about that. But first I wanted to start with Wolfman, which is Lee Whannell, I guess you could say following up The Invisible Man, with the whole sort of... Obviously he's going down the Universal Monsters route, whether it's like a universe thing. He's been kind of vague, but also kind of like not if it is going to be that, it's not going to really be in the traditional sense. It's going to be very mild, which makes sense to me. We don't really need another universe or anything, so I'm kind of fine with him in general as a director, because obviously his debut was like Insidious 3, and it was like, oh, he was just kind of doing James Wan. But then once he really did his own thing with Upgrade and then The Invisible Man, it's like, okay, so he's actually a really exciting director. And I actually had... I don't know if you could say I was like super, super hyped about this, because I was kind of trying to just keep expectations at, a regular level. But I was concerned and a little surprised when I saw the reviews coming in, and they weren't particularly great. They weren't like they weren't like eviscerating it or anything, but they weren't strong. Which I was kind of surprised by, because everything that kind of that was adding up here was like everything about this should work, because it's the Wolfman concept. That's easy enough. You got Lee Whannell, who's obviously proved himself by now, especially in this sort of territory, and you have Christopher Abbott starring and Julia Garner co-starring, and so that by itself is just like, yeah, like everything here works. So what could possibly have gone wrong? Well, the thing about it is that I don't know if I had it in my head that the reviews weren't strong when I went into it. I didn't like read them specifically. I had just heard that they were less than you would expect, given everything on paper going into it. So I don't know if that did something to my expectations or what, but I'm fine with this movie overall. I do get to where it's underwhelming for what it is, especially when he did something as great as he did with The Invisible Man, like, in particular, because it's in this territory. But, yeah, so as it starts, we do get our main character's backstory, which is very funny to start with, because the second you see this child, it's like, this isn't a present-day scene. This kid looks so much like a child Christopher Abbott that before anything's even said, before you've been given any context, oh, this is our opening sort of flashback scene to get to know the main character as a child, and something will have happened to him. So just visually by itself, it already accomplished that. And then, we get the opening where his dad is like really sort of aggressive, and they're out hunting, and then there's something in the woods, etc. And then we come forward, and we meet the family now, who is Abbott, who is a writer, and you got Julia Garner, the wife, who is a journalist, and they're kind of not on the same page anymore, obviously. And you would think, especially with these two amazing actors, that there would be sort of more between the couple here, and the sort of build up into what we're going into, and how their relationship and the way they play the emotions off each other is going to enhance the horror as it comes in. That's typically what happens here. There really isn't much with this couple. I think that's maybe one of its setbacks, where there's not really as much of an emotional ground as it feels like there probably should be as we go forward, because these opening scenes are a little bit empty. So that's probably something where it could have really excelled when it got to that point, but it's just sort of, they're just sort of here. I will say, with her like being a journalist, and the idea of, when we kind of first heard about this, this whole movie when Ryan Gosling was attached, and the way they were describing it, it sounded a lot more like The Howling than the sort of what we from like the typical like Wolfman story specifically. So it does feel like it's sort of combining elements to kind of be this new modern day thing, and that's something that I can totally get behind. And of course, you're going to have the visual style that Linnell's really been showing off that he has for a while now, where there's the moment where they have that first initial crash with their car as they're going out there, and they've landed sideways. So even though they're hanging sideways, the camera's turned to where everything we're seeing looks right side up. So when, like, you know, you see the threat of falling out, or we actually see a guy they've picked up fall out, and it just kind of looks like gravity really tripping out. Stuff like that is really cool. And you could see that it was kind of trying to, like, there was a lot of emphasis on visually trying to bring this concept to life, since it's a concept we've seen so many times before. So this was going to be where it found its sort of unique place in telling the story. But, like I said, without an emotional foundation, or a strong emotional foundation, it does feel like through the whole thing there's something kind of lacking, because it's very straightforward. Like, the entire movie is very straightforward about what it is. Where we get the backstory, we meet the family, and then the shit starts happening. Like, the first attack happens, and then it goes from there and never stops from the first attack sequence on. So, one thing I did like about that is the fact that it's not one of those movies that pretends to be horror before it actually is. Where it's not one of those movies where, in probably just about any horror movie, you have the moments before and where it's like, oh, we're kind of just building up character right now, but we want to keep reminding the audience that they're watching a horror movie because we're afraid they'll get bored or something. So they'll throw in, like, you know, false scares or jump scenes or whatever it is, false tension, to sort of keep the audience, to sort of give them something until it's actually getting to what the initial payoff is. I like the fact that we don't really get any of that. It's just kind of like, here's the characters, and then once it's horror, it never stops being horror. But like I said, that's a good setup, but it just really feels like there's something missing. Like, because it's so straightforward, and it feels short. It feels really short. I think it's like an hour 40 something, but it feels a lot shorter than that. But while that's typically an asset, I do also think it makes it feel slight in a way, where it's like, when we get to these big scenes, like there's a really nice action scene when they're on top of one of those like plastic tunnels, like for a greenhouse, and the wolf is on the other side of it, and they're like, the only thing separating them is this, you know, piece of plastic, and you can kind of see through it. And so those really work well, but like I said, even with those scenes that are satisfying in their own right, like, it always feels like you're just sort of waiting for something else, but you don't really know what, because you know what's going on and what the concept is. There's not really another shoe that drops or that can drop, because it's so straightforward. So I think there's definitely upsides to being as straightforward as this movie is, but it definitely shows that you probably need to have just a little bit more, even if it's just like in subtext or something, or just through the characters. But it's just sort of all the things that happen, and then it's over, and that's about it. So, I mean, for the most part, I like what's going on here, but it leaves you wanting something else, almost to the point that you can't identify what else you want out of it. Because talking about the whole doing it visually thing, there are these moments, especially with the transformation, where it's like when he's transforming, there's like certain camera turns that kind of put you there, and there's like lighting changes, and then there's the whole thing where they start to lose communication. Something I don't think we really notice right away is happening between the characters, where like he's talking and we hear his words, but they can't. He just sounds like he's growling to them. and they can't understand each other. Like they sound sort of like distant and far away when they try to speak to him. And so like there's even the moment when Julia Garner's like making a call, like an emergency call, and I think she said something like, I think he doesn't know that he's sick. Which is something really interesting that I think they could have sort of played with a little more, and something that could have also kind of turned the idea of the concept on its head a little more. Like I said, because this is something that really does need that, because even though it is typically a winning concept, it's also one that needs to be refreshed as you do it, because it's so, not only have we seen it so many times, but because it's a relatively simple concept. And doing that without overcomplicating it. But it's found a place here where it's like, it's almost not complicated enough, but I only say that in regards to, like, how we feel emotionally about it. So, there's that. We also get, like, those point of view shots from him where we see what he's seeing. And how it's almost like he's sort of all seeing, where it's like, it's kind of like this white and blue sort of, it almost gives him like an infrared kind of thing, because there's a great moment where they think, Julia Garner and the child think they're like hidden in the dark, and we see from his perspective, and they're like plain as day, like right in view. That's really cool. There's a moment where he like looks out to the woods, and the woods just like light up. Everything looks really good, and it's a really good idea to show like from his perspective, but it's, yeah, there's, that's another one of those things where it's like, if they had more ideas like that, that kind of gave us a different look at it, like actually physically looking at it, this could have been something quite special, when it's just sort of like, this is fine. It's not, like I said, I don't really like think there's anything too bad to say about it. I think it's just really, it just leaves you wanting a little more, and just like like I said, like one of those like one last shoe to drop or something, could have been there or should have been there. But yeah, and it's like, especially with Abbott and Garner being like naturally magnetic actors in general, it really feels like there should have been something more, because they do, I mean, they do like this allegorical thing, where, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, where it's, like with The Invisible Man, it was the, you know, abusive relationship and the trauma that follows, and feeling like, you know, there's always a presence there, and like your tormentor's like always there, even when they're not. And that whole thing was so well done. And with this, it is like, I heard them talking a lot about this before it came out, about it being about, like, you know, disease, and having to watch, you know, like, someone you love sort of deteriorate in real time. There's the moment at the beginning, where there's the opening scene where we see how aggressive his dad is, and then there's the follow-up scene in present day where he scolds their child, and we can kind of see his dad from that earlier scene in him, and it's almost like this sort of, it's going for like hereditary disease in a way. So there's something there in regards to that, but it does feel like it's, like I said, without that, you know, emotional foundation, it's only sort of there in like vague, you know, context. Like, it gives a little more context to it, but it doesn't feel like it makes it a deeper connection to the characters the way it should. The way we felt connected to Elizabeth Moss when we saw the monster that her actual, you know, boyfriend was, or husband, or whatever he was. And then that, you know, sense of not being able to escape him was something that felt very grounded and very real about that movie. And this, you can see the makings of that, but it's like not quite there. But there's still plenty of things I really like about this anyway, so it's just not quite what it probably could have been. But, you know, it's fine the way it is. It's probably going to get too much hate, is the vibe I'm getting, but I'm still fine with it. So, yeah, it just could have gone up just a little bit, and it would have been at another level than it is, but that's what it is. So, let's go on to Presence, which I think was another one of those movies that was kind of vague when it was on. I want to say it was on the festival circuit, and there was talk that Soderbergh had another movie out there. I think he's got, like, two now, but this one came up first. and it was some kind of supernatural horror movie in a way, but if you know Soderbergh, you know there's probably going to be more to it than that, and it's probably not going to be what it seems. And sure enough, this is pure experimental Soderbergh, and I don't know about everybody else, but I love. There's like hardly anything more exciting than experimental Soderbergh. Even when it doesn't end up quite working, I love the effort. And the fact that it will probably be something that feels like something you've never seen before. Or at least in a way you've never seen before. And because Soderbergh's gone, he's done his mainstream stuff, he's done his Oscar-winning stuff, and then sometimes he'll just do whatever. And this one's a David Koepp script, which is a name that's usually like, whenever I see David Koepp's name, I feel like it's gonna be something worthwhile. And he's another person that's kind of done big and small things, and then like his own thing. Not to this extent, but yeah. So the idea also how hands-on Soderbergh is with everything, especially with his movies like this, where not only did he direct it, but he's the cinematographer, he's the editor. He's like, when you see the camera moving, you know that it's him behind it. And it really feels like one director just making like everything happen. And like I said, especially when he's in experimental mode, it's just so exciting to me. Even when the movies are as downplayed as this, it's like so invigorating to see a director that's still this alive, this far into his career, having done all the things he's already done. He has made so many movies and so many different kinds of movies. And this one, I want to say, was Kimmy the last one? The one with Zoe Kravitz? That one was exciting in its own right also. And this one being the first-person point of view haunting movie, where there is a presence inside this house, and the whole movie is from the perspective of whatever this sort of lurking spirit is. And as this family's come in, this very, very troubled family, and it's, I think the only person I recognize is Lucy Liu in the cast, but the whole cast is very strong and really creates this very specific dynamic that we get to know very quickly. Because, once again, the movie's very short, but in this case, the family and its dynamic and who connects to who, and how the dad is much more in tune with the daughter. Lucy Liu is weirdly fixated on the son and seems to not care much about the daughter at all, even though the daughter is grieving like her best friend who has just died. And you get all these different vibes of where the characters are coming from. So even there's something uneasy in this family already. So it's very interesting that we're looking at them through the perspective of this sort of spirit of some sort. And so this is one where I don't really know how much I can say without it being too revealing. So I'm going to probably be annoyingly vague here, but talking about now that the characters are established, and like I said, even when it's like somebody like the son especially just comes off like a real piece of shit, which kind of in turn makes Lucy Liu come off like a piece of shit, especially since we get this sort of background on her where she seems to be doing shady shit over the phone involving her job that we don't quite get into, but it very much establishes that this family's all out of balance and all out of whack. And is clearly troubled in various ways. And the fact that they have this presence in their house is really, like, at first, kind of the least of their problems. So, when you talk about the camera movement that Soderbergh does here, it's like you can sense, you know, him behind the camera as it moves, because we're seeing it from a particular perspective. But what's really interesting is when it does, like, these very specific turns, and, like, when it's observing something really specific, or it's observing from far away. You get that vibe, and the way it sort of pans around. But then there'll be times where it's like, oh yeah, I can feel like, you know, Soderbergh is walking around with the camera. And then in the same shot, the camera will just begin to float and go down the hallways and into other rooms much quicker. And it's like, well, how the fuck did he do that? And I love that. I love that this is like a very, very small production. And Soderbergh is one of the few directors that can make a movie this simple and this small and still have you say, "How the fuck did they do that?" It's so fun and so exciting. Despite how the movie is very sort of dark and sad and creepy and all of these emotions in line with this. But like I said, just watching Soderbergh do his thing is so fun to me that kind of creeps in also, and I love that. So I really love that feeling, and still being able to feel what the movie is intending for us to feel on top of that. Like I can have fun and feel the, oh, is this sinister? Is this sad? What is this? The mystery element of it, where it's like, because the way the presence moves around and the way it observes the specific things that it is observing, it's always a question of like, is this thing sinister? Like, is this thing building up to go off? Or is it friendly? Or is it like, is it in mourning of itself? Is it just observing? Like, is that all it's doing, is just observing this particular family? And then the question comes in of like, is it a presence that's always been here, or is it attached to the family? It's almost like watching. It's almost like watching an alien observe humans. And if you're worried, it doesn't go in that direction. If you're worried about that, it's just what it feels like a lot of the time, and things are revealed. Like it's not ambiguous the whole time. So, because I imagine this is going to be one of those movies, obviously, that is not what some horror fans go into and expect that this is what it's going to be. But I don't know. I'm not sure how people will react to this, honestly. But I haven't looked up any sort of reviews or reactions or anything like that. But if you know the stuff that Soderbergh does, especially when he's feeling experimental, this is the kind of thing that you can feel him in it, but it also feels like something that he hasn't touched on before at the same time. And I love like all those questions leading up to it. But the thing about it though is that talking about the fact that all is revealed more or less, I do think that won't hurt, because it is one of those things where it's like, I do think rewatches will be really, really good to this, because even when you have it, even when you know kind of what's going on, or mostly what's going on, it's still just the feel of it, and it'll add another layer to the previous emotions that were coming on, even though the first time around these emotions are shrouded in mystery, and it's like, should I be feeling this, or do I feel this? I can't tell. As it goes on and as things unravel, then they start to become a bit more solidified until we reach our point. And I think that's something that's going to remain even after like, what's going on and what it is exactly. And it's not, to me, it wasn't underwhelming. This is one of those movies also where it really hinges on like what the audience's expectation is of what the payoff is going to be and what the sort of reveal is going to be. And most of the time when you have a whole movie that's leading to a reveal, most people are just going to naturally walk away underwhelmed, because that's just what happens. So I think this is something that kind of goes beyond that, because it is interesting too, and I think this may be one of the things people probably would find underwhelming, is that the way what we're, like, obviously it's a spirit, or a presence, or whatever you want to call it, and we're looking out through it. And sometimes it can be a little aggressive, sometimes it can move things around, sometimes a lot of the times it's like hiding, like it's scared itself of them. And so when you look at all of these things from this perspective, it's what we're looking at amongst the family is quite grounded, apart from the way the presence participates, as it from time to time. So when it gets to what we're leading to, like what kind of the big payoff is, it doesn't really go otherworldly as far as what we're looking at. The only otherworldly thing here is the presence that we're looking out from. Everything else is quite grounded in what happens and what it's leading to. So that's, I feel like, a pretty interesting concept. And like I said, probably something that some people that are expecting more of a horror-y thing might find underwhelming, though it's still a horror-y direction, you could say, we go in, I think. So, like, if this was a movie from, like, a typical standpoint, and we weren't watching it from a presence point of view, or there wasn't even a presence here, there would be something that still gives off that vibe, that creepy vibe, and that unpredictable vibe. So and I think it helps a lot also to have a main character, the main character Chloe, be like really easy to sympathize with. I would say character-wise, the thing that's missing is a bit more insight on Lucy Liu's character of like the way she's so weirdly obsessed with the piece of shit son and the shady shit that she's doing. That's yeah, that feels a little underdeveloped, but like I said, we're seeing it from a very limited perspective anyway, so that might be intentional. But yeah, I'm a really big fan of this. Just as I think it helps a lot. I've been putting a lot of focus on Soderbergh specifically, and I do think it helps a lot that if you're a fan of this stuff where he's kind of trying out something new or something sort of kind of like innovative in a way, I guess you could say, that's that just that by itself will make this work anyway, and then everything else is just kind of either extra for the people that do like it or whatever, like they sort of taking away from the technical aspects of it for the people that don't or that aren't digging it. But I was kind of into the whole thing, so I was really happy with that. So let's end on The Damned. This is actually the movie that started the year off. It came out like the 3rd or something. And so when a horror movie called The Damned comes out January 3rd, you're never quite sure what you're in for. More often than not, it's probably going to be a pretty bottom of the barrel, cheap looking, back in the day would have been straight to video. These days, most likely straight to streaming kind of movie. Or it could be something that's more off the radar than it should be, and it's probably something people discover over the year and then over time after that. I think it definitely falls much more into that latter category because it's set in Iceland and we get our opening shot, and it's one of those cases where if a movie is going to be really shitty and cheap and should have just gone straight to streaming, or if it's going to be doing something really interesting and high quality, either way, you're likely going to know from the first shot or the first scene. And this was one where it was like, okay, it's like an extremely well shot, eerie opening, and really shows the isolation and shows off the location. And we see the dark figure of our main character wandering around, and it's foggy, and it's like, okay, I'm really liking the feel of this. This is not something that was like cheap and throwaway. This is something people put a lot of care into right away, and sometimes that can be deceiving where the rest of it's shit from there, but just there's something about this opening scene was like, this is something else. This is going to be something of pretty high quality, something very well made. Even if other things about the story or the scares or whatever, or the characters fall short, it's going to be extremely well made. So, and that, in horror especially, that goes a long way. But there's something really cool about this story also, where we're at a fishing station, I think they call it, and they are basically isolated in the snow until spring, when they can get out. And it kind of takes on this ghost story approach, this very old-fashioned ghost story approach, where we hear a story beforehand, and then also what ends up happening in the movie itself feels like its own sort of ghost story, especially the beginning, when they reach this moral dilemma where they see this boat gets stuck and the crew is, they've crashed and they're drowning and they are going to die. And the thing of this moral dilemma of our main characters here deciding, oh, we need to go help them. We're just watching them die, but if we go out there, if we even survive going out there to help them, we will lose all of our resources and we will die anyway. And so it becomes this thing of just having to watch these people die from a distance, and then this sort of eerie shroud of horror that comes over the story from then on. How it's this, like, dread-inducing omen of what's to come, watching that happen. And like I said, that in itself feels like the beginning of, like, a classic sort of campfire ghost story. And talking of it as a campfire ghost story, and the idea of it starting with a crashing ship, it was like, I was wondering how strong the vibes of The Fog were going to be throughout this movie. And I say that as a good thing, because I fucking love The Fog. I love its atmosphere, and the way it begins with an actual campfire story and feels like one. And I was happy to get those vibes at the start, but it is, it's not comparable to The Fog apart from that. It's very much its own thing. And that's... looking at it from our main character, the actress's name is Odessa Young, who's really strong here. And the way that she's been... this position has been thrust on her because her husband has died, and now she's basically in charge of this whole thing. Despite maybe seeming in over her head, but we also learn right away she's willing to make the hard choices. Roy McCann plays the, big intimidating character, is the one that basically says we gotta leave those people to die or we'll die. And we see her given the final decision, and while typically you would think this kind of character would go against that or try, the way she immediately latches onto that of like, no, he's right. Like, it's awful, and we're gonna have to live with ourselves. But we're gonna have to let that happen, or we're all dead. And so that's a weight that's on her for the rest of the story. With already an unseen weight of all the stuff that's happened before the movie even started, with her husband and being trapped out here. That's a weight that's already on her, and now you've got this new one, and then the fact that she's gonna be terrorized by this whatever supernatural event is happening here. It's quite vague about that as it goes on. Like, it's got, like, its own sort of lore going on, but it's also incredibly vague about what's going on, too. And I think the combination of those two things, where it's like, we feel like we're getting an explanation, but whenever something horrifying happens, there is still this mystery element of, what is going on here? Is this real? Is she just losing her mind? What is even going on here? And that gives it this unpredictable quality of what is going to be the next sort of terror scene, and how is it going to unravel character-wise. And because it does have, like, there is a kind of jarring, I guess you'd call it a gross-out moment early on, but those are also balanced out by the quiet stuff, where, like, she's out in the snow and she's looking out into the darkness, and there's like a figure there, and we just linger in silence for a long time as we, the audience, along with her, kind of look at this image like, are we looking at what we think we're looking at? Are we even sure what we're looking at? Like, and then something will happen. Like a scare will happen. And the fact that it lingers like that enough for us to really take in, like, something's realistically scary like that. Like, I can't tell what I'm looking at, but I think I know what I'm looking at, and that whole thing. Where it's like, it's hard to tell, like, is this, a trick of the light? Is it my mind playing tricks on me? Or ghosts. Like, very hostile ghosts or creatures or whatever it could be. It really could be anything, and that whole idea of, is it real or is it not, comes up a lot throughout it. There's the moment where she sees, like, a similar figure lurking in a corner, and it's just standing there for a long time, and she's horrified. and we're not cutting to the other people yet. So it's this, you have enough time to think like, is anybody else seeing this? And that's a really creepy feeling to kind of come up on you in this moment, where it would typically be this, sort of obvious scare scene that we've seen a bunch before, but the way it lingers without showing the other reaction shots gives us time to react to it in our own way, which is really fun. So, and yeah, sometimes there's moments that could be considered cheap. There's not one but two instances where it lingers on something quietly in total silence, and just as we're kind of anticipating somebody's gonna move or something's gonna jump out or something, it cuts to the next scene, and the next scene starts with like a loud clatter or noise or something. They pull that one off twice, and I could see people thinking that's cheap, but there's two things. Number one, the way they do earn the build-up, where it lingers long enough for us to genuinely anticipate something, and then they get us in this really sort of silly way. But secondly, it almost feels like, I like the fact that there almost seems to be like a sense of humor in the editing, because this is, for the most part, a pretty straight-faced movie, like a very sort of bleak, sort of dire experience. So to see the sense of humor in the movie and like the editing is really interesting. So, I mean, I guess you could say there's light moments with the characters here, but this is another one where I feel like it's, if the movie has a weakness, it would be the characters are more like we have a very strong lead character, and Joe Cole's character is kind of like, the dynamic between them kind of becomes a little interesting. But for the most part, it feels like it's her and then everyone else. Like, there's not a whole lot of individuality as far as the rest of the crew here. And so that's something where I feel like if each character sort of had, like, a particular standout moment that made it easy to attach to them, there might have been more going on here as things transpire and each character, suffers some sort of fate of some kind. Because it's another movie that's also very, very short. Like, that's kind of another theme of these three. So it's almost like you could have put maybe just a little bit more time into just a tiny bit more of the character work. It could have done something, but like I said, just how well made it is, and how it uses the aspects like editing and stuff like that to throw its little bit of sense of humor in, and have those moments where it lets us react to the scares in our own way. That's like really, really great stuff that's not done in horror enough. So I was really appreciating that stuff. I still don't know how I feel about the climax. I have mixed feelings on the climax. Particularly with, there's like one line, I hate to be that guy, but it's like one line was like, oh, that just, that kind of undid a lot of the tension you built up here. It's a pretty, like, cerebral experience. Like I said, you get to experience your own imagination deciding what to do with the imagery that you're looking at. The really, really well shot, well put together imagery. And then we have one particular moment here where the main protagonist here, she's up against whatever this is, and she says out loud, "You're not gonna get in my head." It's like, that just seemed really, really sort of blatant after everything we'd worked up towards, of letting us sort of figure things out and seeing things play out with not really a whole lot of explanation, apart from like one like piece of lore or campfire tale or whatever. To just kind of have her blatantly come out and tell the thing, "You're not going to get in my head." And it's like, no, we understood the whole movie that we don't know if this is real or not. And just the way that really laid it on thick. I don't know, that's, but yeah, otherwise, it feels like it sort of betrays the terror that they had, and the cerebral terror that they'd been setting up. So, but other than that, yeah, there's a lot of strengths in this one, especially technically, and in the lead performance, so yeah, I'm really into this one as well. So, for the most part, quite a bit of success with this one. with just the exception of the Wolfman maybe missing its, moment to be just a little bit more than it was. But love Presence and really, really impressed with The Damned as well. So that's, I guess, where we're going to leave this. Next, we'll talk about stuff like Flight Risk and Den of Thieves and Back in Action, and we'll hopefully get back to doing this regularly as we go throughout the year, and we don't miss too much like we did last year. Still doing a lot of catch up on last year. So but that's what's coming up now. So until then, I think that's it.